The grand lecture hall of the Galactic Institute stretched wide enough to hold 300 students from 17 different worlds. The ceiling curved high above, displaying a simulation of the night sky as seen from Valorum Prime. Rows of seats descended toward the central platform where Professor Thexnil stood beside a massive holographic projector. Deho sat in the middle section, his notebook open on the desk in front of him. To his left sat Minji, who was typing notes on her tablet with quick fingers. On his right, Hyunwoo sketched the various plant specimens the professor had shown, adding small notes about their potential uses. The three humans were the only representatives from Earth in this advanced xenobotany course. Around them sat students that would have seemed impossible just 5 years ago. A Velarin with crystalline stalks growing from its head occupied the seat behind them. 3 Quillan students, each no bigger than a house cat, shared a single desk to Deho's far left. Across the aisle, a massive Gren student took up 4 seats, its thick arms resting on specially reinforced furniture. The air itself seemed alive with the soft sounds of different breathing patterns, the occasional click of mandibles, and the scratch of writing implements on various surfaces. Professor Thexnil was a respected figure throughout the galaxy. His papers on evolutionary botany had won him awards from 12 different scientific institutions. His crystalline stalks, which served as his primary sensory organs, caught the light from the holographic display and scattered it in small rainbows across his gray skin. When he spoke, his voice came through a translation device that rendered his words into each student's native language. "We now move to a particularly interesting section of our study," the professor announced. His 3-fingered hand gestured toward the hologram, the botanical failures of evolutionary development. The display shifted to show a plant with green pods clustered along a climbing vine. Tiny leaves grew in pairs along the stem. Small white flowers dotted the upper portions. To Deho it looked remarkably familiar, but he kept quiet and listened. "This specimen comes from Kepler 442c, a world we surveyed 6 months ago," Professor Thexnil continued. "It demonstrates several evolutionary dead ends that make it entirely useless for any practical purpose." The professor touched a control panel, and the hologram zoomed in on the pods. "First, observe the seed pods. They contain seeds with an outer coating so hard that most fauna cannot digest them. This defeats the purpose of seed dispersal through consumption. Second, the plant produces mild alkaloid compounds that deter most herbivores from eating it at all. Third, it requires enormous amounts of water compared to the nutrients it produces. And fourth, attempts to use it for any medicinal or industrial purpose have failed completely." He waved his hand dismissively. "It survives only because it grows aggressively and requires little soil nutrition. But survival without purpose is hardly a success story. This plant represents wasted evolutionary energy." Deho felt his heart beat faster. He leaned forward, studying the hologram more carefully. The pods, the flowers, the way the leaves grew in pairs. He had seen this before. He had eaten this before. The professor moved to the next slide, showing a chart of chemical compounds. The alkaloids present include lectins and phytic acid, both of which interfere with digestion in every species we have tested. The protein structures are too complex for efficient breakdown. Even the Gren, who can consume nearly anything organic, found these seeds completely indigestible. The massive Gren student across the aisle nodded its large head in agreement, making a sound like grinding rocks. Deho looked at Minji. She had stopped typing. Her eyes were fixed on the hologram, and her mouth hung slightly open. She turned to look at him, and he saw the same recognition in her expression. On his other side, Hyunwoo had stopped sketching. His pencil hovered above the paper. "Professor," Deho said, raising his hand. The crystalline stalks on Professor Thexnil's head swiveled toward him. "Yes, Student Deho? May I approach the display? I think I recognize this plant." A ripple of movement went through the lecture hall as students shifted to look at the human. The professor's stalks quivered in what the humans had learned meant curiosity, mixed with skepticism. "You recognize a plant from Kepler 442c? Humans have never visited that world." "No, sir, but we have something very similar on Earth. May I take a closer look?" Professor Thexnil gestured toward the platform. "Please approach." Deho stood and made his way down the steps between the seats. He heard whispers behind him in languages his translation device rendered as fragments. "What does the human see?" "Humans have strange ideas about plants." "This should be interesting." When he reached the platform, The professor manipulated the controls to bring up additional angles of the plant. Daeho walked around the hologram, studying it from all sides. The pod structure, the tendril that helped it climb, the root system shown in cutaway view, everything matched. Professor, do you have an actual specimen? Not just the hologram? The professor's stalks bent backward, a sign of surprise. I do, in the preservation vault. Why? I would like to confirm my identification. May I see it? For a long moment, the professor simply looked at him. Then he walked to a panel on the wall and pressed several buttons. A drawer slid open, revealing a preserved section of the plant sealed in a transparent container. He brought it to Daeho. The human held the container carefully. The pods were dry now, but the structure remained clear. He looked closely at where the pod attached to the stem. He examined the small leaves. Then he touched the control that allowed him to open the container briefly, just long enough to catch the faint scent that remained even in the preserved sample. A smile spread across Daeho's face. He turned to face the professor and the entire lecture hall of alien students. Professor Thexnil, with respect, I need to correct your assessment. He held up the container so everyone could see. On Earth, we call this edible. This is nearly identical to what we call a pea plant. Humans have been eating these for more than 10,000 years. The lecture hall erupted in noise. Students made sounds of confusion, disbelief, and surprise in a dozen different ways. The Quillan students chittered rapidly to each other. The Valoran behind Daeho's seat stood up, its stalks waving wildly. The Gren student made a deep booming sound that might have been laughter. Professor Thexanil's stalks went completely rigid. He stared at the human, then at the plant, then back at the human. Impossible, he said finally. The compounds would make you violently ill. Minji stood up from her seat. Professor, may I join the discussion? I am studying agricultural engineering and I can explain. Hyunwoo rose as well, and I am documenting food cultures across human history. I can provide cultural context. The professor looked at his three human students. His stalks slowly relaxed and began moving in small circles, which they had learned meant deep thought. Come down, both of you, he said quietly. It seems we have much to discuss. As Minji and Hyunwoo made their way to the platform, Daeho held the preserved pea plant and smiled. This was going to be an interesting lesson. The three humans stood on the platform while 300 alien students watched in silence. Professor Thexanil crossed his arms, his crystalline stalks pointing directly at them. The holographic display still showed the rotating image of the pea plant from Kepler 442c. Explain, the professor said simply. Minji stepped forward first. She pulled up data on her tablet and gestured for permission to link to the main display. The professor nodded, and moments later, images from Earth appeared beside the alien plant. Side by side, the similarities were striking. This is P. sumsatavam, the common garden pea from Earth, Minji began. Her voice carried clearly through the lecture hall's sound system. Humans have cultivated this plant since approximately 8,000 BCE in our calendar. That is over 10,000 years of agricultural history. She swiped through images showing ancient pea cultivation, medieval farms, and modern agricultural fields. The plant you found on Kepler 442c is not identical to our peas, but it is remarkably similar in structure and chemistry. The pods, the climbing vine, the flower structure, even the root system matches our Earth varieties. Professor Thexnil's stalks quivered. But the alkaloids, the lectins and phytic acid, how do humans tolerate these? We do not just tolerate them, Professor. We digest them efficiently. Minji pulled up a diagram of human digestive chemistry. Human stomachs produce strong acids and enzymes specifically designed to break down complex plant proteins. Our intestines host billions of bacteria that help process plant compounds that we cannot digest alone, and our livers can filter and neutralize many toxins that would harm other species. A Valoran student raised a crystalline stalk. But why? Why would humans evolve such systems? Daeho answered this time. Because Earth is a difficult planet. We have ice ages and droughts. We have seasons where food becomes scarce. Early humans could not afford to be picky eaters. We had to consume anything that would not immediately kill us. Over millions of years, our bodies adapted to handle a wide variety of foods. He held up the preserved pea pod again. These seeds that you call indigestible? Humans eat them fresh from the pod. We cook them in soups and stews. We dry them and store them for winter. We grind them into flour for bread. My grandmother in Korea makes a traditional porridge from beans like these. I have eaten similar plants at least 3 times a week my entire life. Hyunwoo added his perspective. And it is not just Korean food. Every human culture has recipes based on legumes like this. In India, they make dal from lentils. In the Mediterranean, they eat chickpeas and fava beans. In Africa, they cook pigeon peas and cowpeas. In Mexico, they eat black beans and pinto beans. Across every continent and every climate, humans have found and cultivated plants similar to this one. Professor Thexneil walked slowly around the three humans, his stalks moving in complex patterns. You're telling me that my entire assessment was wrong? That this plant has significant value? Not just value, Professor. Essential value. Minji pulled up more data. These plants do something special. Their roots form partnerships with bacteria in the soil. These bacteria take nitrogen from the air and convert it into compounds the plant can use. When the plant dies or when we harvest it, that nitrogen stays in the soil. It makes the ground more fertile. She showed images of crop rotation and companion planting. Farmers on Earth plant these between other crops to improve soil health. We call them nitrogen fixers. They help other plants grow better. A farmer who plants peas one year will have healthier wheat the next year. The Gren student who had earlier confirmed the peas were indigestible made a rumbling sound. But I tried to eat these. They made me sick, Deho nodded. Yes, because your digestive system evolved differently. Humans can eat many things that would poison other species, but that does not make the plant useless. It only means that different species have different abilities. Professor Thexneil returned to his control panel. His fingers moved quickly across the interface. If what you say is true about human digestion, then perhaps other plants in my collection might also be edible to humans. Hyunwoo smiled. May we see the collection? The professor's stalk stood straight up, a sign of decision made. Class is extended by 2 hours. I am invoking my authority as senior faculty. We will examine my complete collection of failed botanical specimens. He looked at his 3 human students, and you 3 will tell me which ones you consider food. The next hologram appeared, showing a thick root with brown skin and white flesh. This is from a world we call Tau 77. The root contains crystalline structures that damage soft tissues when consumed. It also has compounds that cause numbness and paralysis in every test subject. We considered it potentially useful as an anesthetic, but the side effects were too severe. Deho laughed, actually laughed out loud in the quiet lecture hall. Professor, that looks like cassava. Or maybe taro. We have roots like this on Earth. Impossible. The crystals would tear your throat. Not if you prepare it correctly, Minji said. She was already pulling up information on her tablet. Humans learned thousands of years ago how to process toxic roots. You soak them in water to dissolve the crystals. You boil them to break down the toxic compounds. You can even ferment them to make them safe. She showed images of cassava processing, from the raw root through soaking, grinding, and cooking. In Africa and South America, cassava is a staple food. Millions of people eat it every day. Yes, it is toxic when raw, but humans learned how to make it safe. The professor brought up the next specimen without comment. This one showed seeds with extremely hard shells, harder than the pea pods by several magnitudes. Hyunwoo spoke before the professor could explain. Those look like grains. Perhaps wheat or barley? We do not eat those whole, Professor. We grind them into flour. We have been doing this for at least 12,000 years. Another plant appeared, this one with bright red fruits that according to the data caused severe, burning sensations in mouth tissues, peppers. All 3 humans said simultaneously. A student from a water world made a bubbling sound through its translation device. You eat things that burn you? We like it, Deho said with a grin. We put them in our food on purpose to make it spicy. Some humans grow the hottest peppers they can find just for the challenge of eating them. The professor cycled through more specimens. A bitter leaf that humans recognized as similar to tea or coffee. A fruit so acidic it burned through testing equipment, but looked like a citrus to human eyes. Seeds that required roasting at high temperatures. Just like nuts on Earth. Tubers that needed to be boiled for hours. Just like certain potatoes. With each plant, the 3 humans provided information about similar Earth species and how they prepared them. The alien students watched in growing amazement. Some had started taking notes frantically. Others simply stared with whatever organs they used for seeing. Professor Thexneil stood silent for a long moment after the 20th plant. His crystalline stalks had gone through every emotion they had learned to read, from skepticism to shock to something like wonder. This is impossible, he finally said, but his voice lacked conviction. One species cannot have this range of dietary tolerance. Professor, Minji said gently, may we visit your laboratory? We can show you the research data from Earth. We can explain the evolution of human digestion. This is not impossible. This is simply how humans survived. The professor looked at his 3 human students. Then he looked at the lecture hall full of amazed aliens. Then he looked back at his collection of botanical failures displayed on the hologram. Class dismissed, he announced. Humans, come with me. We have much work to do. Professor Thexenil's laboratory occupied an entire wing of the Institute's research building. The walls were lined with preservation chambers containing thousands of botanical specimens from hundreds of worlds. In the center of the room stood a massive analysis table equipped with scanners, chemical analyzers, and holographic displays. The professor's research assistant, a quiet Quillen named Rix, worked at a side station, cataloging data. The 3 humans entered behind the professor, and Minji immediately went to the nearest preservation chamber. Inside were dozens of specimens labeled with coordinates and dates. She pressed her face close to the transparent surface, studying each one. May I access your full database, Professor? She asked. Thexenil hesitated only a moment before nodding. Rix, grant them level 3 access. Let us see what they find. Deho moved to a different chamber. This one contained what the label described as toxic flowering plants. He scrolled through the catalog on the attached display and his eyes widened. Professor, you have specimens here that look like mustard plants, horseradish, and wasabi. All of these are edible to humans. The compounds in those plants cause severe respiratory distress, the professor said. They produce isothiocyanates that trigger immediate defensive reactions in most species. They make us cry when we cut them, Deho admitted. And they taste very sharp and strong. But we put them on food as condiments. In Korea, we make kimchi with plants like this. The sharp taste is exactly what we want. Hyunwoo had found another section entirely. Professor, these fungi you have labeled as inedible. May I see the full analysis? The professor brought up the data on the main table. Mushrooms from various worlds. All produce compounds that interfere with neural function. Some cause hallucinations. Some cause temporary paralysis. None are safe for consumption. Unless you cook them properly, Hyunwoo said. He was scrolling through images on his tablet, comparing them to the specimens. Humans eat thousands of varieties of mushrooms. Yes, some are deadly poisonous, but many others are delicious once you know how to prepare them. We dry them, we sauté them, we put them in soups. Some cultures even eat the ones that cause mild hallucinations, though that is not recommended. Professor Thexenil's stalks were moving in rapid circles now. Show me your data, all of it. I want to see your research on human digestion and food preparation. For the next 3 hours, the laboratory became a classroom of its own. Minji connected her tablet to the main display and walked the professor through human evolutionary history. She showed how early humans were scavengers who ate whatever they could find. She explained how the development of cooking with fire changed everything, allowing humans to consume foods that would have been deadly raw. Fire does what our bodies cannot always do alone, she explained. High heat breaks down cell walls, denatures proteins, and destroys many toxins. A potato that would make you sick when raw becomes perfectly safe when cooked. Meat that might contain parasites becomes safe when roasted. Fire gave humans access to a much wider range of foods. Deho contributed information about fermentation. Humans learned to use bacteria and yeast to transform foods. We ferment vegetables to preserve them and make them more digestible. We ferment grains to make bread and beer. We ferment milk to make cheese and yogurt. These processes break down compounds that our bodies struggle with and create new nutrients. He showed examples from Korean cuisine specifically. My mother makes soybean paste at home. We start with beans that are actually toxic when raw because they contain compounds called trypsin inhibitors. But we cook them, then we ferment them with special bacteria for months. The result is not only safe but incredibly nutritious. We use it as a base for soups and stews. Hyunwoo added the cultural knowledge component. What makes humans unique is not just that we can eat these things, but that we remember how to prepare them. We pass this knowledge from parents to children across thousands of generations. We write it down in recipes. We teach it in schools. An Italian grandmother knows how to make pasta from wheat flour. A Japanese chef knows exactly how long to ferment soybeans for miso. A Mexican cook knows which peppers to use for which dishes. Professor Thexenil absorbed all this information in silence. His stalks moved constantly, processing what he was learning. Rix, the assistant, had stopped working entirely and was watching the humans with unblinking eyes. Finally, the professor spoke. If this is true, if humans really can consume this range of plant materials, then my entire collection needs to be reassessed. He turned to face them directly. I want you three to go through everything. All 4,000 specimens. Tell me which ones humans could potentially eat. That will take days, Minji said. I have days. This is the most significant discovery in xenobotany in 50 years. If even a fraction of these plants have agricultural value, it changes everything we know about colonization and food security. They began the work immediately. The professor pulled up specimen after specimen on the main display. For each one, he provided the chemical analysis, the evolutionary history, and the reasons it had been classified as useless or toxic. And for each one, the humans provided their assessment. A plant with seed pods that exploded when touched, similar to touch-me-nots on Earth, and the seeds inside were probably edible if you could collect them safely. A root that turned blue when cut and tasted intensely bitter, possibly like a radish or turnip. Bitter but edible, especially when pickled. A grain that required cold temperatures to germinate, similar to winter wheat, which humans had cultivated in cold climates for thousands of years. The pattern continued through the afternoon and into the evening. Some specimens the humans rejected as too dangerous or too different from anything on Earth. But more than half of the collection received positive assessments. Plants that could potentially be food, spices, medicines, or agricultural aids. One specimen in particular caught Deho's attention. It was a climbing vine with leaves that produced a sap when broken. According to the analysis, the sap contained complex latex compounds that cause severe allergic reactions in most species. This might be like rubber, Deho said. Not for eating, but for making things. Humans harvest latex from rubber trees to make flexible materials. If this plant produces similar compounds, it could be industrially valuable. Professor Thexnil stared at him. You mean to tell me this plant that has poisoned 3 research assistants could be useful? If handled properly, yes. Humans learned to work with latex thousands of years ago. We know how to harvest it safely and process it into useful forms. By the time the station's night cycle began, they had reviewed 200 specimens. Professor Thexnil called for a break, but none of them wanted to stop. The discovery was too exciting, the implications too vast. Professor, Minji said during a brief rest while Rix brought them beverages. Do you understand what this means? There are thousands of worlds in the galaxy that cannot grow food for most species. But if these plants can be cultivated with human knowledge, those worlds become viable for colonization. I am beginning to understand, the professor said quietly. His stalks had gone still, pointing straight up, and what they had learned meant deep contemplation. I am also beginning to understand why humans are the only species that colonized every environment on their home world. Deserts, tundra, mountains, islands. You could eat what you found and make it work. Hyunwoo nodded. That is exactly right. Humans are adaptable. We learn, we experiment, we remember, and we teach others. That is our strength. The professor stood and walked to the window. Outside, the lights of Valorum Prime sparkled under alien stars. This changes everything, he said. This changes galactic agriculture. This changes colony planning. This changes how we think about planetary resources. He turned back to face the 3 humans. Tomorrow I am calling an emergency faculty meeting. This discovery needs to be shared with the entire institute. But tonight we continue working. I want to see how deep this pattern goes. Deho, Minji, and Hyunwoo exchanged glances and smiled. They had come to the Galactic Institute to learn about alien biology. Instead, they were teaching aliens about human capabilities. Let us keep going, Deho said. We have 2,000 more specimens to review. The emergency faculty meeting took place in the Institute's council chamber 3 days later. 50 professors from various departments filled the semicircular seating area. Professor Thexnil stood at the center podium with Deho, Minji, and Hyunwoo beside him. The air hummed with translation devices working overtime to render the conversation into dozens of languages. Professor Velthra, head of the biology department, spoke first. Her species communicated through color changes in their skin, which the translator rendered as words. Professor Thexnil, you claim that humans can consume plants we have classified as inedible for 50 years. This seems unlikely. What evidence do you have? Thexnil gestured to Minji, who stepped forward. We have spent the last 3 days conducting tests. With permission from the medical department, I consumed samples of 15 different plant species that are considered toxic to other species. I am here, healthy with no ill effects. My blood work shows normal digestion and no toxin buildup. A murmur went through the assembly. Professor Kren, a specialist in evolutionary biology, rose to his feet. His species was tall and thin, with multiple joints in each limb. This proves only that one human has a tolerance. It does not explain why or how this tolerance exists. Deho took over. That is what we are here to explain. The answer lies in human evolution and the planet we come from. May I use the main display? Permission granted. Deho pulled up images of Earth. Our world has extreme variations in climate and environment. We have frozen regions where temperatures drop far below the point where water solidifies. We have deserts where no rain falls for years. We have dense forests, open grasslands, high mountains, and deep valleys. And all of these environments change dramatically with the seasons. He showed images of Earth through its different climate eras. Furthermore, Earth has experienced multiple ice ages, periods of thousands of years where much of the planet was covered in ice. During these times, food became scarce. The species that survived were the ones that could eat anything available. Minji continued the explanation. Early humans were not strong or fast. We could not compete with large predators in direct combat. We had no armor, no venom, no claws or sharp teeth. What we had was endurance and intelligence. She brought up a diagram showing human anatomy. Humans are persistence predators. We can run for hours without stopping. We sweat to cool our bodies, which allows us to keep moving when other animals must rest. Early humans would chase prey animals until they collapsed from exhaustion. This took all day sometimes, which meant humans needed food that could sustain long-term energy output. That is where our unusual digestion comes in, Deho added. We needed to extract energy from whatever we could find. Seeds, roots, leaves, fruits, nuts, insects, meat, fish. Our digestive system evolved to handle all of it. He showed a detailed breakdown of human digestive chemistry. Our stomachs produce hydrochloric acid with a pH around 2. This is strong enough to break down tough plant fibers and kill most bacteria. Our small intestine is longer than many predators, which gives us time to extract nutrients from plant materials. And our large intestine hosts trillions of bacteria that help digest things we cannot break down alone. Professor Kren interrupted. But the toxins. How do you handle plant defensive compounds? Minji smiled. Our liver. The human liver is remarkably efficient at filtering blood and neutralizing toxins. It produces dozens of enzymes specifically designed to break down poisonous compounds. It can process alcohol, which is toxic to many species. It can handle alkaloids, glycosides, and many other plant defenses. She pulled up a comparison chart. A human liver weighs about 1.5 kilograms and processes 1.4 liters of blood every minute. It is one of our most important organs for survival. Without it, we would die within days. With it, we can eat foods that would kill most other species. Hyunwoo stepped forward for his part of the presentation. But biology is only half the story. The other half is culture and knowledge. Humans did not just randomly eat poisonous plants and hope for the best. We experimented, we observed, and we remembered. He showed images of ancient human settlements. When humans found a new plant, we would test it carefully. Maybe someone would taste a tiny amount and wait to see what happened. Maybe we would watch animals eating it and see if they got sick. Over generations, we built up knowledge about which plants were safe and which were dangerous. And we learned how to make dangerous plants safe, Deho added. We discovered that cooking with fire changes chemical structures. We found that soaking certain roots in water removes toxins. We learned that fermentation breaks down compounds our bodies struggle with. This knowledge was passed down through families, through tribes, through entire civilizations. Minji pulled up examples from around Earth. In South America, humans learned to process cassava, which contains cyanide compounds when raw. They developed a multi-day process of soaking, grinding, and cooking that makes it completely safe. In Asia, humans learned to ferment soybeans, which contain anti-nutrients that block protein absorption. After fermentation, these same beans become incredibly nutritious. In every human culture you find this pattern, Hyunwoo said. We take plants that seem useless or dangerous and transform them into food. We do not just eat what nature gives us. We actively change it to suit our needs. Professor Thexnell spoke up. And this brings us to the final piece of the puzzle, cultivation. Humans did not just learn to eat these plants. You change the plants themselves, Deho nodded enthusiastically. Exactly. Over thousands of years, humans bred plants to be more useful. We selected seeds from the plants that tasted better, grew larger, or had fewer toxins. Generation after generation, we shaped these plants through artificial selection. He showed before and after images of various crops. Wild wheat has tiny seeds and shatters easily, making it hard to harvest. Modern wheat has large seeds and stays on the stem until we cut it. Wild cabbage is a small, tough plant. Humans bred it into dozens of varieties, including broccoli, cauliflower, kale, and Brussels sprouts. Wild bananas have huge seeds and little edible flesh. Modern bananas are all flesh and no seeds. The pea plant from Kepler 442c that started all this, Minji added, that was probably wild stock. If humans cultivated it for a few thousand years, we could breed it to have larger pods, sweeter peas, and better growing characteristics. We have done this with hundreds of plant species on Earth. Professor Velthra spoke again, her skin shifting through thoughtful colors. So you are saying that humans evolved to be generalist omnivores with advanced food processing techniques, supported by cultural knowledge transmission and active plant breeding? Yes, all three humans said together. And this makes humans uniquely capable of utilizing plant species that other civilizations have dismissed as worthless. Yes, they repeated. A long silence filled the chamber. The professors looked at each other, their various forms of body language indicating deep thought and discussion. Finally, Professor Kren spoke. If this is true, and I believe it is, then humans represent a unique resource for galactic agriculture. There are hundreds of colonies struggling to achieve food independence because the local plant life is considered inedible. With human knowledge, those colonies could become self-sufficient. There are also worlds we have never colonized because we found no useful plant life there, added Professor Velthra. These worlds might be viable with human cultivation techniques. Professor Thexenil's stalk stood tall. This is why I called this meeting. This discovery is too important to keep in one department. The implications affect the entire institute and potentially the entire galaxy. Another professor, this one from the Agricultural Sciences Department, stood up. We need to establish a formal research program. Human agricultural sciences should be studied and documented. We need to understand not just what humans can do, but how they do it so others can learn. We need field tests, said a professor from the Colonial Administration Department. We should identify struggling colonies and see if human techniques can help them. The meeting continued for hours. Proposals were made, committees formed, and research grants discussed. Through it all, Daeho, Minji, and Hyunwoo stood quietly, watching as their simple observation about a pea plant transformed into something much larger. As the meeting finally adjourned, Professor Thexenil turned to his three human students. You came here to learn about alien biology. Instead, you have taught us about yourselves. That is the best kind of education. Daeho smiled. We learned something too, Professor. We learned that what seems normal to us is actually remarkable to others. News of the discovery spread through the galactic communication networks faster than anyone expected. Within a week, the story had reached every major world in the known galaxy. Students and faculty at the Galactic Institute found themselves at the center of attention from scientists, politicians, and journalists from hundreds of species. Daeho woke one morning to find 57 messages waiting for him. Research institutions wanted to interview him. Agricultural colonies requested consultations. News organizations offered large sums of money for exclusive interviews. He sat on his bed in the student dormitories, scrolling through the messages with growing amazement. A knock on his door interrupted his reading. Minji and Hyunwoo stood outside, both looking equally overwhelmed. Have you seen the news feeds? Minji asked, stepping into his room. Hyunwoo held up his tablet. They are calling it the Human Agricultural Revolution. There are entire discussion forums dedicated to analyzing what this means for galactic food security. They made their way to the campus cafeteria, where the usual morning crowd had swelled to twice its normal size. Students from other departments, faculty members, and even visitors from off-world packed the space. When the three humans entered, conversations stopped. Beings from a dozen species turned to look at them. A Quillan student approached them nervously. Is it true? Can you really eat the thornbush plants from Caldera 7? My family's colony is there and we have to import all our food at enormous cost. Daeho looked at Minji, who pulled up information on her tablet. If you send us samples, we can analyze them. If they are similar to plants on Earth, we might be able to help. More students crowded around with similar questions. Agren asked about the crystalline roots from his homeworld. Avelaran wanted to know about the acidic fruits that grew wild on the colony where her parents lived. Each query represented a world where food was scarce and survival was difficult. Professor Thexnil found them an hour later in a small conference room, still answering questions from a growing crowd. His stalks drooped with fatigue. "We need to organize this properly," he announced. "The Institute has approved a new department, the Center for Comparative Xenobotany and Human Agricultural Sciences. I will be the director, and you three will be my senior research associates." "But we are still students," Minji protested. "You are experts in a field that did not exist 2 weeks ago. The galaxy needs your knowledge." He gestured for them to follow him. "Come, the first delegation has arrived." In the main administrative building, a formal meeting room had been prepared. Representatives from 5 different worlds sat around a large circular table. Some wore environmental suits. Others breathed the station's atmosphere comfortably. All turned to watch as the 3 humans entered. A representative from the colony on Kepler 186F spoke first through her translation device. "Our world has thousands of plant species, but none that our people can eat safely. We have been importing food for 30 years at costs that are bankrupting our colony. Can you help us?" Hyunwoo sat down carefully. "We would need to see samples of your native plants. We would need to analyze their chemistry and compare them to Earth species. But yes, if the plants are similar to ones humans have learned to eat, we can help." "And if they are not similar?" another representative asked. "Then we can potentially teach you human cultivation techniques," Minji said. "We can bring Earth seeds and show you how to grow them in your soil. Many human crops are highly adaptable." The meeting lasted 4 hours. Each representative explained their world situation. Some had plants that seemed promising. Others had soil conditions that might support Earth crops. A few had neither but wanted to understand human methods anyway. By the end, Daeho felt exhausted but excited. They had committed to analyzing samples from 8 different worlds and conducting on-site consultations for 3 colonies. It was more work than he had imagined when he raised his hand in that first lecture, but not everyone was happy about the developments. That became clear 3 days later when security alerts went through the Institute. A group calling itself the Galactic Ecological Preservation Front had issued a statement condemning the reckless promotion of human agricultural imperialism. Professor Thexnil called an emergency meeting with his 3 human students. "There is resistance to your ideas. Some species believe that introducing human cultivation methods will damage natural ecosystems. Others worry about the safety of consuming plants bred through human techniques." "What do they want us to do?" Daeho asked. "Stop. They want you to stop sharing information and return to Earth." Minji's face hardened. "We are not forcing anyone to use our methods. We are offering help to colonies that are struggling." "How is that wrong?" "They argue that humans are too willing to manipulate nature, that your species' relationship with the natural world is unhealthy and should not be spread to other civilizations." The professor's stalks drooped. "I do not agree with them, but their concerns have reached the Galactic Council. There will be a hearing." The hearing took place in the Grand Council chamber on Valorum Prime 2 weeks later. The chamber was enormous, with seating for representatives from every member world of the Galactic Federation. Daeho, Minji, and Hyunwoo sat at a table in the center, surrounded by tiered seating that rose high above them. The council speaker, a being whose species was so ancient that humans had no reference for their appearance, initiated the proceedings. "We are here to address concerns about human agricultural practices and their potential impact on galactic ecology and food security. The council will hear arguments from both sides before making a determination." The opposition spoke first. They presented arguments about ecological damage, genetic manipulation, and the dangers of aggressive cultivation. They showed images of environmental problems on Earth, areas where human farming had caused soil erosion, water pollution, and species extinction. Then it was the humans' turn. Hyunwoo stood first. "Everything the opposition has said is true. Humans have made mistakes. We have damaged our environment through poor agricultural practices, but we have also learned from those mistakes. Modern human agriculture includes sustainable practices, soil conservation, and environmental protection. We do not come here claiming to be perfect. We come offering to share both our successes and our failures so others can learn from our experience." Minji stood next. "The opposition talks about genetic manipulation as if it is something dangerous. But all agriculture is genetic manipulation. Every species that farms selects which plants to grow and which seeds to save. Humans simply do this more deliberately and over longer periods. We do not use any technology that other species do not also use. We simply have more practice. Deho stood last. The most important point is choice. We are not forcing anyone to adopt human methods. Colonies contact us asking for help because they are desperate. They are spending resources they do not have to import food. Some colonies are failing entirely because they cannot achieve food security. We offer them options. They decide whether to use them. He pulled up images from the consultations they had already conducted. This is Kepler 186f. They had a plant similar to lentils that they thought was useless. We showed them how to cultivate it. In 6 months, they will harvest their first crop of locally grown food. The colony administrator called it a miracle. More images appeared. This is Tau Ceti D. The soil was too acidic for any crops they tried. We introduced earth buckwheat, which thrives in acidic soil. They now have a sustainable food source that also improves soil quality. This is Ross 128b. They had crystalline roots similar to taro. We taught them processing techniques to make them edible. 3,000 colonists no longer depend entirely on imported supplies. The council chamber was silent as the images played. Colonies that had struggled for decades were now growing their own food. Children who had only eaten imported rations were tasting fresh vegetables. Farmers who thought their soil was worthless were harvesting abundant crops. The council speaker conferred with advisors for several minutes. Finally, they spoke. The council has reached a decision. Human agricultural knowledge represents a valuable resource for the galaxy. The sharing of this knowledge will continue under the following conditions. First, all implementations must be voluntary. No colony will be pressured to adopt human methods. Second, environmental impact studies must be conducted before introducing any Earth species to new worlds. Third, the Galactic Institute will establish formal training programs so that other species can learn human techniques properly rather than attempting them without guidance. Relief flooded through Deho. They had won. Not completely, but enough. The speaker continued. Furthermore, the council recognizes the 3 human students Deho, Minji, and Hyunwoo for their contributions to galactic agriculture and food security. They will be granted research fellowships and full access to council resources for their continued work. The chamber erupted in sounds of approval and dissent, a cacophony of dozens of species expressing opinions in their own ways. Outside the chamber, Professor Thexnil waited. His talks performed a complex dance that the humans had learned meant joy. You did it. You actually changed galactic policy. Minji laughed. We just wanted to point out that the pea plant was edible. And now that pea plant has altered the course of galactic civilization, the professor said. Never underestimate the power of small observations. 6 months later, Daiho stood in a laboratory that had once been Professor Thexnil's collection of botanical failures. Now it was a thriving research center. Students from 30 species worked at stations throughout the space, analyzing plants, testing cultivation techniques, and preparing reports for colonies across the galaxy. On his desk sat a small pot with a familiar plant growing in it. Green pods hung from a climbing vine. Small white flowers bloomed at the top. It was a pea plant, grown from seeds collected on Kepler 442c and cultivated using human agricultural knowledge. Minji walked over carrying a data pad. We have 3 more colonies requesting consultations, and the training program has 50 new applicants. We are going to need more staff. Hyunwoo joined them, holding a container of fresh vegetables from the Institute's new experimental garden. I still cannot believe this all started because you raised your hand in class. Deho looked at the pea plant and smiled. Professor Thexnil called it useless. I just knew we called it edible. Sometimes the difference between useless and essential is just a matter of perspective. Through the laboratory windows, the lights of Valorum Prime sparkled against the darkness of space, and on hundreds of worlds throughout the galaxy, colonies were planting seeds, testing techniques, and learning that what one species considered waste, another species considered wealth. The human agricultural revolution had begun with a simple truth. Perspective matters, knowledge is valuable, and sometimes the most important discoveries come from recognizing that what you have always known is not what everyone else knows. Deho touched the pea plant gently, feeling the familiar texture of the leaves. Somewhere on Earth, his grandmother was probably making bean porridge the way her grandmother had taught her, and here, Millions of light years away, he was teaching aliens the same fundamental lesson his ancestors had learned 10,000 years ago. Plants are not useless or useful on their own. They become useful when someone knows how to use them.